Okay, we're recording that. That's cool. Let's sort ourselves out on Facebook. It'll take about a minute by the time I log it all in and stuff. So
Sure, no problem.
yeah, it's really started to. It settled here quite a bit yesterday. We had a really good dump of snow, so it's still around this morning. Quite slippery.
Lingers. That's the thing about us being close to this. Well, you're not next to the coast, but it doesn't last very long. It disappears.
Yeah. Thing is, it's quite warm, isn't it? It's quite rare when it
Yeah,
snows near the coast, isn't
yeah,
it, or near
yeah.
any kind of body of water, really.
You must get it harder up there, I guess, so isn't it?
Well, Leicester's in a dip. It's really weird. If you go to somewhere called Bradgate Park, which got the old Folly, Old John, you can stand up there and you can look down on like the Space Centre and the whole of Leicester, and it's in a dip, so you can see all the surrounding hills like a big circle. So
Right.
if it snows in the county, the chances are we won't get it because all the snow will fall on the hills. But if we get it, then normally the county's been pretty hammered with snow.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
It's normally a good indicator.
Yeah. Bit of a yardstick for the weather.
Yeah. Talks about his photography. Cool. Right, here we go. Let's go live. Great. So here we are, been joined by Vince Bevan this morning. Good morning, Vince. How are you?
Morning, John. Very good, thanks. Good to see you.
Good. Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. Day 5 of our 10-day conflict reportage archive, specifically around conflict memory and education. And I'm really keen to talk to you. I mean, yeah, it's one of those weird ones, isn't it? We kind of started following each other on Instagram, and then we had a conversation and realised that we were quite empathetic to people. I think that's probably the best way of explaining it.
Yeah. The powers of social media hooks you up, and it's a good thing. Yeah.
Now, what I think is really interesting is obviously I'm drawn to 4 particular bodies of work that you have. Obviously, the East Timor work, then your Bosnian War work in Mostar, the Karen in Burma or Myanmar, and then obviously now the war in Donbas. So I'd like to touch on each of those 4 areas. But what I did for the first time over the weekend in preparation for today was looked at your other body of work, which I kind of try and challenge myself when people do things that I'm not naturally interested in from the documentary media centre's perspective. And what really struck me, and this is my first question to you really, is looking at all the work that you did from your portraits to your personal baggage story, which I thought was quite interesting about people in the UK living next to a landfill site, right through all your other work as well, is you've got a natural affinity for people.
Yeah, that's what I'm really interested in. I think behind any major story, it's the human element really, and the impact of the story on families and individuals. That's what and everybody has the most amazing stories, even down to the landfills. People living next to the landfill site, and that's what interests me. And it's their resilience really, on how they put up with it and how they deal with it, and how they challenge it, or some will ignore it. But. It's always the human story. It's always about that individual, and you see it, of course, in all the conflict zones, the refugee camps and stuff. It's the resilience of people that fascinates me. Fascination is the right word, really. It's just huge respect for people who surmount these things that happen to them. And they've happened to them with no choice of their own. It's just been put on them, and they have to deal with it. And it's that human resilience. I mean, in those, particularly the war zones, and the refugee camps, you see the very, very worst of people, but also see the very, very best of people. And it's just humanity, isn't it? Really, it's. But yeah, it's always the human story. That individual. I think there's a bit of a romantic hero behind all of us, in all honesty, and not so much a romantic hero, but a hero. There's a hero behind everybody, and it's how you pull your socks up and get on with it. And I've seen some amazing people who do that on a daily basis.
Yeah. Is that the kind of thing that drives you as a photographer? Is that how you first got into it? I think my partner always says to me, "I'm a man born out of time." You know what I mean? So I'm always looking for the best in people, and I'm always trying to find out the truth. I've probably got a very kind of black and white version of good and bad, but obviously the world's all a grey zone. So, almost like my entire life's been an education of learning about the grey zone to work out that kind of stuff. Is that something similar for you? Is that how you got drawn to photography in the first place?
It is always the stories, really, the human stories. But I've done other stuff as well. You do landscape stuff, but I mean, I love photography in general. I'm not by no means an expert in conflict journalism or conflict photography. I've dipped in and out of this kind of thing, but it's always the human story. And I think, my grandfather was an amateur photographer. And so he taught me how to print, and he was always in the darkroom when I was 12, and we had a darkroom in the garden and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, he made his first enlarger out of an old BP oil can, just after the war, so he was very much, a bit of a pioneer on all that kind of stuff. But yes, it's always about the story. I remember I went to art college. I think it was in '73, and somebody handed me a book on my first day there, which was Don McCullen's The Destruction Business, his first publication. It was the picture of in Cyprus, I think it is, of the boots. So the body's laid up in the back of the Land Rover. You might know the image. Mm-hmm. And I just looked at that and I thought, it's a film still. It can't possibly be real. How could you put together an image like that? And I was just transfixed with the cover of this. And of course, obviously then you got to know Don McCullen, through at least his work, through the book. And the guy just gave me the book. He says, no, you have to have the book. It's yours now, and I still have it. It's up on the shelf,
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, that's what drew me in. And of course, you've done little detours here and there throughout the years, but it's always been that in the background. It's why I've always done photography, and I think a lot of photographers are the same. It's why they take up photography. You have to do other stuff to make a living, to earn a crust, basically. But so you end up doing all kinds of stuff. I photographed everything, but I've done studio work, and still lifes and all kinds of stuff. But it's always the human stories, and it's always the photojournalism in the background that you're always striving for. And it's really, I've done commercial work to pay for my own stories. I haven't been guided by anybody else. No one's commissioned me to do this stuff apart from, the landfill work. So I've just gone off and done it myself, which means you're open to do whatever you want to do and let the story take you, basically. And the story, it finds a life of itself. You have a rough idea as to what you want to do. You do your research and off you go. But, the story dictates, and you just follow it. You follow your nose, and throw myself in the deep end and take pictures while you're digging yourself out, basically, But you're guided by the people and their stories. The most incredible stories, the people in the refugee camps in the Karen, refugees and IDPs on the Thai-Burma border, the people in East Timor, the guys in Mostar. And like I say, recently, being with someone, 83-year-old Valentina in Ukraine, digging sniper bullets out of the front room, watching telly in the back room and listening to the explosions going on outside. It's how they deal with it. That's what fascinates me, really.
Okay, but let's deal with them, not necessarily in chronological order. But, being as you you mentioned the Karen first, let's kind of start with those guys. I mean, first of all, how do you even end up in the situation where you're there in that camp? I mean, what was your initial thoughts about, I'm going to go and photograph that?
they'd always have been on my radar, actually, the Karen. I'd followed the story, and a lot of people have actually covered that story. What interested me was the Karen have, they have a long association. They had a long association with Britain. I mean, they were allies with Britain, fighting the Japanese in the Second World War. And the other thing was the fact that it is, the world's longest running civil war since 1948. They weren't granted any concessions when Burma was granted its independence then. And even in the camps then, when I was there, there were guys in their 80s that were still waiting for Britain, or expecting, or thinking that Britain was still going to come to their aid. And the fact that it's so underreported, I know it has been reported a lot, but you don't see it reported that much in this country. But really, yes, I mean, you do your research beforehand, you file contact numbers, contacts. When I got there, a lot of them just, were no good. So I just ended up going to Mostar up on the border. I managed to get one contact who put me in touch with somebody else. All very, people were wondering, well, who is this guy? Why is he phoning up? Who is he? We know anything about him? Da, 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 da. So in the end, one evening I was sitting in the hotel, and basically I had a message on my mobile to text to say, look, go outside to the hotel and phone this number. So I went down, phoned the number, and then somebody tapped me on the shoulder, right, come with us. So off we went, and they vetted me basically, and I said, look, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't the trip that was planned. I intended to go much deeper into Burma, but that just didn't happen. It takes longer, and I wasn't there for very long. But basically, I said I wanted to get into Lepahur across the river, which is an IDP camp, and they arranged that. So it took a while, but we did. We got across the river. We had to get in a boat. You had to have a tarpaulin over you because of you're going past the Thai outpost, and they didn't want any journalists in there at all. So we got in, and we did a little tour around on that first trip, and just to get to know the place. We went up to, there was a KNLA, Korean National Liberation Army outpost between the camp and the SPDC, the Burmese army. It was a ceasefire, actually, at that time. And that was one of the reasons I went, because, well, there's going to be a story there, things are going to start to happen, basically. Everybody I said, look, there's a ceasefire, obviously things are coming to an end, and said, no, no one believed it. And that was 2004. And even right now, as we're speaking, the Korean army attacking the Burmese army are attacking Korean villages right now. And that started the 1st of December, and that is still happening right now. I mean, there's a site called the Free Burma Rangers, a humanitarian group, and they report all this stuff on a daily basis. But all these villages are being attacked, and they don't really know why, But that's how I ended up in Lepahur. And then I also got into Myanmar, which is across the river, almost adjacent to Lepahur, a few kilometers down the road. That was holding about 45,000 refugees, mainly Karen. And so I ended up doing a story as a contrast between the two. I went back to Lepahur on a second trip. By this time, the camp commander had said, look, if you're coming back in there, maybe you can do us a favor. So I had to sit amongst all the camp leaders and say, look, we need a new water system, because the camp was right on the Moi River. It was polluted, undrinkable. They were still catching fish in it, meeting it, getting ill. So they said, we'll take you for a tour, where we get our water from. So anyway, we're on the other side again. And I stayed a couple of days, and we went, and they were getting their fresh water shipped down through a rotten old bamboo pipe system, about 2 kilometers long. That was just a mess, basically. So they look, we need the equivalent of, I think in UK money, it was about £300. I thought, oh God, that's, but anyway, look, I'll do what I can do. See what can happen. I came home. I did a few talks. I did a little portfolio of pictures up, sent them around to various places, and raised just over £2,000. Wow. Now, I sent £500 to Lepahur, which is more than they needed. The rest was distributed to Myanmar and the Free Burma Rangers. But I didn't hear anything for about 3 months. And I thought, well, we sent the money over. I think it got there, well, I've done what I can. And then I had a letter from the camp teacher, Rainbow, who I stayed with, and a handwritten letter with all little end prints of the installation of the water pipes. All these guys carrying, big bundles of blue water pipes, and installation from start to finish, and even down to how they'd spent the money, down to how much rice they were paying the workers each day. They wanted to account for every single penny I'd sent them, basically, bless them, So that was a buzz, really. That was the most satisfying thing ever in my career, and
that fits with traveling, doesn't it? And going to people in the most harsh scenarios, and the ones that have got the least are the ones that give you the most.
Yes, yeah. It was, well, you do these stories and you wonder, what good is this doing? You're going to tell someone's story it needs to be told, and they want it told, and they want to get it out there. I didn't have any those pictures didn't get really published at all very much, but to get that result for them, sadly, I mean, in 2009, then the camp was attacked again. The camp was attacked again. By then, there were 3,200 people in it, and I don't think it's been reestablished.
I'm just going to share your website now. Let me get it up on the screen. Here we go. See if I can get that to work. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
So let's go down to here's the Karen section, and at least then we'll put the link up to your website. Some interesting images there. I mean, I was particularly drawn to this image down here of sort of this chap here. Again, I'm not saying there's similar poses in all of your work, but there's the empathy towards people, isn't it? Sort of, getting beyond the story, not the easy story of, oh, here's the camp, here's the problem type thing. You take time, particularly when we end on your Donbas ones. I think they're incredibly powerful images, up there with the best that I've seen, actually, and that's why I was fascinated to talk to you.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Well, that's Blacktown. He was actually working as my translator, and that was in the Reverend Sir Simon's house. There's no pictures of Sir Simon on there, actually, but he's no longer with us. But he ran the Kaituli Bible College in the Malar camp, and that's his dining room, actually. That was before he arrived just to meet us. But Blacktown's got an interesting story. He'd been made a refugee with his mother. They lived in the jungle for some time, but he wants to be as I found in many things, he just wants to serve his people. Basically, he wants to become a medic. So I'm trying to remember all the captions and the stories behind such a long time ago. But he wants to be a medic or a doctor. I think just to serve his people, and many people said that. The Reverend Simon deliberately made himself a refugee. He didn't have to leave Burma, but he made himself a refugee to serve his people. And it's not just people taking up arms against, whoever's oppressing them. It's, the other stories as well. There's another guy on there, which is another interesting chap, I think. Yeah, just to the, on the other side, if you go back down again, the guy, the next one along, the next two along, a guy called So Gladdy, the next one along, no, the other way.
Sorry.
That's it, yeah. He was in the Malar camp. He was just about to leave to go back deep into Burma with a friend of his, and he had invented, his father had taught him engineering, and he had invented this turbine, basically, that would run off a waterfall deep inside Burma that would generate electricity for a clinic they were setting up for landmine victims. Because that's a massive problem. It's one of the most landmine areas in the world. But he had even worked out, he showed me the calculations, I got pictures of it somewhere, on how much the electricity it would generate in the dry season and in the wet season, and all this equipment bundled up and off they went, hugely dangerous. If the Burmese army had caught them, dread to think what would have happened, really. They are, they are suffering the most horrendous treatment, really. Some of the things I wouldn't even want to describe, here, but you can do your own research and look it up. It's just incredible, really, how they deal with it. And I think it's something you've touched on in the past, various interviews, is the mental traumas of all this. It's a big thing. Various studies have been done on how it's affecting the Karen and, other minorities. Of course, the Rohingyas, big story, in recent years. It's not just the Rohingyas, it's not just the Karen, it's, it's happening across to many of the ethnic minorities there. But again, like East Timor, Bosnia, in Ukraine, it's the PTSD is a massive thing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost one of those interesting ones as well, isn't it, to work out why the Rohingya were expelled rather than the Karen when it had been going on for such a long time.
Yeah. It's
okay. So let's move on to East Timor and How did you find yourself there? Because that was in 99. You said
99.
March,
Yeah.
April 99 on the eve
Yeah.
of independence. How
Yeah.
did you find yourself halfway around the world?
Well, in '98, I'd been trying to get to into the Tamil area of Sri Lanka for about 5 months. I'd had a couple of meetings with the Tamil Centre in London, and they'd kind of vetted me. That was fine. It was being organised. What I wanted to do, they were happy with. They'd been in touch with the people over there. I mean, it went on for about 5 months. I was due to go in December. And then it all fell apart basically because of the situation. I don't know why, it was never explained to me. But there was a BBC crew that was due to go in as well before me, and their trip got cancelled. So just, after 5 months, it was hugely frustrating. But anyway, in January, of course, Suharto had stepped down by then in '98. And then earlier in '99, the Indonesian government had offered this referendum to East Timor. And I'd also seen John Pilger's documentary, The Timor Conspiracy, which was an updated version of Death of a Nation from '94. And that just was the most incredible. I think it was one of the documentaries on television that, on ITV, I think it was, that had more calls afterwards than any other documentary they'd ever had. I mean, you've probably seen it yourself. But,
it's over there on the shelf. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw it again recently, and it still doesn't fail. It even more. I find it even more hard hitting for some reason. But
they travel really well, don't they? They almost like stand the test of time.
Oh,
he's done like 6 or 7 about Cambodia, and when you watch that and then go to Cambodia, it's almost like the must-read guide alongside the travel guide of Cambodia. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about the work that he does.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I saw that and I thought, yeah, well, let's give that a go then, see what might be possible. And of course, the Balibo 5 journalists were killed in Balibo in '75. I was in college at that time, and that rung a bell with everybody in college at that time. Well, we weren't studying photojournalism, but for those of us who were interested in it, they thought, wow, because there were 2 British nationals in that crew as well, to the 2 crews, I think. But anyway, I thought, right, let's give that a go. Let's go. And I got into the story. I found an activist group because I thought, well, how the hell do I do that? I found an activist group in the UK, got their number, rang them, spoke to this guy, lovely chap. And I said, look, this is what I want to do. Can you give us any contacts? And he's, in my naivety.
The good old days, my friend, the good old days.
And he said, well, obviously I can't do that because I don't know who you are. If there was time for us to meet, there isn't the time. So he said, look, go to Dili, make it known what you want to do, and they'll find you, basically. Just don't make it known what you want to do in the wrong places. And that was it, basically. I went to Jakarta, got over to Dili, didn't know anybody, went to the Hotel Turismo, which is, quite a famous hotel for housing journalists, and did exactly that. Went to the local Fretilin political party press office, spoke to the guy there. There were a lot of young guys hanging out, and then they just, I said, look, what's the chance of getting up to the Valentine camps, thinking it would never happen, and got talking with a few and said, well, we'll see. And then just got in with them. Basically, the activists, I was having dinner one night. There was one guy, my fixer translator, who I started working with more and more. And I was having dinner in Turismo one night, and he came in with another guy, and he couldn't speak English, but this guy, my normal guy, translated. And we went through this various, conversations, questions, this, that, and the other, and he just went, and then my normal guy came in and said, okay, yeah, we'll go tomorrow. And I was basically being vetted, to see whether we could. Anyway, cut a long story short, we were in the truck Palm Sunday, and off we went. We left 6 o'clock in the morning, got into the camps 9 o'clock that night, and met with Cornelio Gama, L7. Didn't realize what a major figure he was, until afterwards, really.
I'll share the images now while you're talking.
Amazing guy. His men had a massive amount of respect for him, as did all Timorese, East Timorese. I wasn't there for that long. I wanted to get back because there was going to be a mass exodus of Indonesians leaving East Timor, going back to Jakarta, because basically they knew what was coming. All they knew was going to happen in Dili later that year, and businesses were closing up. So they were getting out basically. But yeah, I mean, that's how we got to the camps. And I mean, there's a lot of stories in East Timor. It was really just kicking off, you know, with the militias are starting to become really, really active. I mean, obviously it had been all kicking off for many, many years, but the militias were becoming more and more active as the vote for the referendum was getting closer and closer. And I mean, like I say, that was Palm Sunday. The following Saturday, I went into a camp, a house in Dili, which was run. It was the Manuel Carrascalau's house. He wasn't there. They were housing some refugees, and about 100, I think, 110. His son Manolito let me in. Christine showed me around. Took a few pictures. There's some photographs actually. If you could scroll down, there's a picture of Christine and the kids just up, the black and white one next to the flag.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, a lot of the refugees, the IDPs, they had come from a village called Galiana. So we planned to go up there the Monday, on Easter Monday. We got up to Galiana. We went through Lakisa, and it was deserted. I thought it was very, very strange how this place is just so quiet. And as we were driving through, outside the other end, there were truckloads of armed villagers, pro-independence guys, villagers coming down, heading for Lakisa to confront the army. Well, I think they were going to confront some of the pro-Indonesian guys and the army. I don't think they realized how much of the army is going to be there, but anyway, it's a long old story, this, but I'll try and cut it a little bit short. We got into Galiana. We only stayed an hour because the militias were around. We had to leave very quickly by another route. We came back out, and as we were coming back out, all those guys going down in the trucks were coming back, and they basically, they'd been pretty much decimated. I don't know what the total, how many were killed. I think I've got 11, I think, on my side. There's more than that for sure.
Yeah.
But no one really knows. I wasn't allowed to photograph anybody because, my fix was, look, if they see you, they're going to close the city down. If they think there's a journalist on this side, they're going to close the city down, basically. So anyway, it took us about another 6 hours to find another route back to Dili. Again, it's a much longer story. But the day after that, and you might know of this, was the day of now that would have been I think the 6th of April, was the Lakisa massacre in the church. A lot of people had sheltered after the Monday confrontation into the church in Lakisa. And I think, again, I've only got about 100 that were killed on information on that caption, but I think it's more like 200 and possibly more. I went back up the next day when I'd heard about it on the Wednesday, and I got a guy. My normal fixer wasn't around. I just got a taxi. I said, look, you drop me outside Lakisa and I'll go in on my own. It's exactly what happened. And I walked up to the church, and there was a couple of police standing outside. There was some army guys further down the road. No one was stopping me, and I thought, well, I'll just walk into the church. And I just spoke to the guys, said, look, can I go in? And they just laughed, basically. And as I was walking down the path to the church, I could see bloodstains on the floor, and I started cleaning up. And then I heard this shout, and there was a bunch of East Timorese, pro-Indonesian East Timorese stopped me and just dragged me back. And if it wasn't so serious, it was always quite funny because they pulled out these iron railings that they were using as spears, and they were too heavy for them. So they were trying to carry these and use them as spears, But they said, in broken English, where did you come from? Oh, you're here, da, 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 da. I said, somebody gave me a lift, and they've gone, da, 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 da. And then somebody else said, no, we saw you come in, we know where. So they took me back to the taxi driver and this poor guy. And this is when those times when you think, God, I put somebody else in danger here, We walked back to the car, even though he knew about everything that was going on. And this guy, I thought, my God, this is going to get ugly now. And his legs just went from underneath him, the poor guy, and he slid down the car. So we were there for a best part of at least half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. And I was, they were just giving him, so much grief. This guy was, just on the floor cowering. I said, look, he's nothing to do. He's just a taxi driver. He's just he brought me here. Basically, he said, right, go and never come back. So
and that was it. Yes.
And then we left. But it's that's how tense it was then. And reading, when I go back now on that story, and there's more information come to light about that a few years later, you think, wow, I had no idea that so many people had been killed. On that.
You can arrive at a moment, can't you, and not necessarily understand the impact of it at that particular time.
Well, you start to think, on that Monday, should I have gone back down to Lakisa with all the rest of them? But then I get, if they'd seen another journalist, could it have been worse? Would more people have been killed? Do you know what I mean? I think being in those places, sometimes it can cause more damage than you're trying to, rather than to get the story out. I don't know what that would have achieved. They were going to do it anyway, basically, and it could have made things worse, basically. And
sometimes you can contribute to it, can't you?
You can, and you've got to find that line between the two. And it's been said about the Kren as well. Is if a journalist has been found, or the Burmese army know of a journalist in any of the villages, they'll put landmines right around the village.
Just so you can't get in.
Yeah.
So I want to pick out two images here. The first one is this one because I can see it behind you.
Oh, right, yeah.
I think you've got it on the wall, so it obviously it resonates in some way with you.
Yeah, that's Lakawi, and I forgive any East Timorese listening to this, then I know my pronunciation isn't great, but he was interesting. We were coming out of the Valentine camps, heading back down the hill, and we saw a bunch of guys under a tree. I mean, it was so hot, but there were no trees around, but there was one tree. There was these bunch of guys arguing, basically, and they were arguing about who was, going to carry the big bags up to the Valentine camp. But we met him, and he hadn't long come out of prison. He was 13 when he was jailed. So I'm trying to remember all the details on this. I think he'd spent 4 years and a few months in jail for stealing ammunition from the Indonesian military. And he'd had that tattoo put on him in jail. But yeah, he didn't say too much, really. Fixer just we asked him a question.
1,000-yard stare there.
Yeah. I mean,
striking image, incredible.
To be in prison at 13 and it's a long time. I mean, most of the activists, and in particular my fixer, was they were all in jail. I mean, my normal guy would be. I won't mention his name now because he never wanted to be photographed, and he never wanted his name to be spoken. And even now, over 20 years ago, I don't have permission, so I can't, I won't say his name. But
no, that's fine.
I mean, they've all been in jail. And when you're sitting in a room with a bunch of these guys, they've all been tortured, and you start to notice that they've all got little round scars on them. And you think, oh, maybe it's some kind of skin thing or mosquito, but they're not. They're cigarette burns.
Cigarette burns, yeah.
From, and and there's some other things I won't even, describe on here what they were doing to them, but, torture with electric shocks and all kinds of stuff, basically. I mean, again, it's an estimate. I think 200,000 people, East Timorese, died under the occupation in the Indonesian occupation in East Timor. And I suspect it's a lot more. And of course, Britain was selling them a lot of hardware as well, sadly.
Oh, yes, there wasn't much moral high ground going on there, I'm afraid, with foreign policy. That's
what's interesting about the Pilger interviews is the politicians, Australian, Indonesian, and British, When
geopolitics gets in the way, isn't it? So I just want to talk about this image as well, because obviously it's on the front of this book. Which I managed to find, the ethics of insurgency, a critical guide to just guerrilla war, which is fascinating, by Michael L. Gross. I mean, that's a really interesting image, and I think it resonates with me running the conflict reportage archive and a little bit of time in the military in the past. Is that everybody looking the same, the uniformity of people's perspective of themselves.
I mean, the berets that hadn't long arrived actually, and they were given out to the veterans. And I hadn't organized that at all. I mean, it looks a little bit organized, but I mean, I'd actually arranged that afternoon to photograph Cornelio, and they said, "Oh, we got the berets. Let's have a shot with the beret." I mean, it sounds quite light, but he was much more serious than that. They weren't mucking about, but they were just kind of, everybody was hovering around, and I wanted to get the picture because we needed to do something else. And he just turned on and barked at them, basically, and everybody just suddenly, because like I say, they had a huge respect for him, and it just fell into place. There was
fantastic image.
Yeah.
It's the one that I want to purchase off you for the conflict reportage archive at some point.
Oh, right. Well, yeah.
There we go. That's good. No, a very strong image that. I said it really, really resonated.
They are a tough bunch of guys, but I tell you, they were so. When I left, they gave me an armed guard back out of the camp. They had when I left, actually, I had $50 American in my shoe as an emergency, and I gave it because Kennelly was complaining that no journalist had visited him. And so I gave him the $50, and he says, because it was in a few notes. So he says, I'm going to spend this bit, and I'm going to keep this bit, because I want to show it to all the other commanders that a journalist actually came to see me.
Proof. Yeah, absolute proof. I love it. Okay, so let's move on to the next one now. Obviously, this is kind of, the Bosnian War and Mostar and stuff. So again, is this something that you did off your own back in '93? Another one of those?
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of journalists in Bosnia, as you'll know. Then a lot of journalists were killed in Bosnia, actually. I mean, there were something like 43 in the first 2 years. I had limited funds again. You financing yourself. I actually took the bus from London, Victoria to Zagreb via Frankfurt. I got a UN press pass in Zagreb, which caused me more trouble than it was worth, in all honesty. And then I took a bus down Dalmatia coast down to Split, and you had to do a little bit of island hopping, because of the, various areas were closed off. And I got into Split. I had planned to go to Sarajevo. I organized a trip through the press office with a German film crew. The day before we were due to go, I think it was a couple of Italians journalists that got killed on the road there. They would been traveling in what they called a single skin vehicle, which was unarmored. So everybody got a bit spooked by that. And the film crew had two Land Rovers. One was armor plated, the other one wasn't. So they all piled in to the armor plated one, and I lost my place. So I thought, well, I've got to do something. So I got the bus. The buses had just started running. And I got the bus to Mostar. We went through all different checkpoints. I think there's always something, you do all the research and, you hear the story, you talk to people, but there's always something when you go into these places that makes you realize, oh, this is, you've got to be, if you don't do this right, it could end up bad, and as we called in one bus station, there were like 3 buses all piled together, just riddled with bullet holes, basically. And everybody on the bus went very, very quiet because the buses, like I say, had only just started running again. But I had got up to the border, and then they wouldn't let me in, basically. I think I kept flashing this UN press pass, and they seemed to make it worse. There was a lot of stuff going on. There were ambulances flying back out of the border as well. But I waited 6 hours, waited for the checkpoint to change. Different people, they still wouldn't let me in, so I went back to Split. And then I found another bus a couple of days later, another route into Mostar. So finally got in, and got into Mostar that night about 8 o'clock, and then was told there's a curfew at 9, so you got to get out, basically, otherwise you'll be arrested. So found my way up to Medjugorje, which is like a little pilgrimage village that had been set up around a sighting of the Virgin Mary 10 years earlier, basically. So I stayed there, and that was my base. And then I was just like hopping back and forth into Mostar from there. It was about 25, 30 Ks away, I think. But yeah, got in. Couldn't get any access, just kept going. I mean, I got arrested about 3 times. when I say arrested, we just carted off to either the HVO headquarters, the army headquarters, or the police station in question. Anyway, finally got the right press pass, which was from the HVO themselves, with this guy's name on it, which was like waving a magic wand when you're trying to get. Yeah, I mean, that opened up a few doors. I got into. I asked if someone could take me to the front line, and they said no. I just you'll have to go and find it yourself. I mean, so off you went, basically. I got into this place. Actually, this is the bank, or what was going to be the bank. This guy in the middle, he found me wandering around. I was photographing one of those medical skeletons, plastic things, outside a building with a tennis ball stuck on its head. And I was photographing this, and he caught me and just started, said, "What are you doing here? This is, you shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." So he said, "You can't go back the way you came. You got to come with us." So he took me down into the basement with a bunch of these guys, and we were all sitting down there. They didn't know they didn't want me there. They didn't know what to do with me. I said, "Right, we'll wait until our shift's finished, and then we'll take you back with us." I'd been there a couple of hours, and they didn't, "Where are you from?" And eventually started talking to me. I said, "I'm from Wales," and they didn't know where Wales was. And I said, "What's your hometown?" And I said, "Oh, Swansea City." And they all just looked at each other, and they jumped up in the air, punching the air, shouting, "Swansea City, John Toshak,"
Excellent.
And I got to be honest, I told a few fibs about, I'd only been in a room with John Toshak once on a press call, and I kind of made out he was, and me, we were big drinking buddies, basically. So I was their mate then, I'm not a football guy as a Welshman, I'm a rugby man, but I knew there was something going on at the top of the building, and you can see the picture on here. So I kept asking them questions and pushing them a little bit. And so they finally agreed to take me to the top. And that's where I found the sniper up there. And there's a picture on there.
This was the one up here, isn't it?
Yeah, where is it? Yeah, the first one, actually.
This guy here.
Yeah. I mean, that was right at the top of the building. He had a view right over the east side. I mean, to be honest, my whole intention of going to Mostar was to get to the east side. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to show what was happening to the Bosnian Muslims on the other side, because they were suffering horrendously, really. And no one really knew how bad it was at that time. But Jeremy Bowen did a brilliant piece on it. He went across there and then actually found another route to Sarajevo from the other side around. And in hindsight, I wish I'd actually tried harder, but it would have been very difficult to do, I think, or even harder to get back. When you're an independent, trying to do it all yourself, it was basically.
It's about knowing when to push, isn't it? And when you're riding your luck, and when your luck's
as
far as it's going to go, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that was published by the Independent, and along with the one with the guy selling ties to the Spanish UN guys. So I knew I had something, but I needed to get the pictures back as well. That's the way I had of doing it, basically. But yeah, I mean, I've still to this day kick myself really for not trying harder, but that's what you do. And to be honest, I was due to go back to Mostar. I wanted to go back to Mostar for last December. There's a story I want to do based around a picture on there, which is the group, the family portrait in one of the frontline flats there. And of course, the Mostar is very much divided still. It's very much a separated city now. When I was there, they were moving basically all the Muslims over into the east side, and that's pretty much stayed the same. But I wanted to trace the people in that portrait. In fact, my fixer, Stoyan, was looking at the portrait and said he reckoned he was in school with a girl in the picture, basically. But it's like that. I mean, it's neighbor against neighbor. That's another thing I found quite staggering is, when you go up to the front line in Mostar, when you went up to the front line in Mostar, you knew you were getting the front line because people were talking in whispers. And I was talking to one guy, and he said there's a guy, and on average is about, the two sides are only about 50 yards away from each other. And there was much less this distance between the two in some places. And one guy was telling me, and the guys, a couple of guys over there, and I recognize his voice. I can hear him talking. I was in school with him, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that's another thing is quite incredible how, I mean, you photograph, I mean, everybody knew about the ethnic cleansing, not just in Bosnia, but in many other places, obviously. And you go through those towns and you know, the outlying towns as well. And, you know, you see some houses, there is not a blade of grass touched, not a plant at a place. Everything is just left. You go to the house next door and it's absolutely riddled with bullets, and you can just see the hatred, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I sent you the link a while back to the Barry Saltzman.
Yeah, incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, the day I became another genocide victim, and he had written in one of it's captioned in one of his pictures, is that when he was doing the project, they were traveling around, and it was such a rough terrain. He was thinking, well, how did these people without any transport get around to kill so many people? How did they do that? And then it struck him, well, they didn't have to travel because they were already there. It was neighbor
on neighbor.
Yeah, and it all just erupted. And I think, you know, it's inherent in many of us, I think, really. I mean, if you put in that, I mean, they're different in Rwanda, obviously, because he was, you know, Hutus killing Tutsis. But, I mean, if things erupted in Leicester, if things erupted in Chepstow, where am I? I mean, what would you do? I mean, you've seen events in America recently. It doesn't take much to tip people over that edge. And you always ask yourself what you would do in that situation yourself. You know?
And I think if you were looking for that particular kind of person, you'd know where to roughly go looking in your city or your location for where those people live. And I think that's one of the things as well that's about sort of, you know, civil war and that kind of stuff, isn't it? It's the fact that, you know, it's not an invasion, there's not a front line per se, it's not an arrival, it's not a takeover as such, it's what's already there, and it's what's the trigger to kick it off, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the way I see it, you know, we're all the same. We're all part of humanity. Having a border between us doesn't make us any different. I mean, we are, you know, we're all part of the same group, really.
Well, I'd have to disagree with you there, Vince, because I'm English and you're Welsh, so we've got a lot of history, you know. Well, it could be something as simple as that, can't it?
Yeah, we got the Six Nations coming up soon, so we'll have to see how we sort that out in the rugby field.
Absolutely. I was going to say to you, we could be sitting there in a pub and then someone turns the television on and the rugby's on and we'd have to move, you know, but there we go.
Well,
as simple as that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But, well,
let's come on to
that's another 30 minutes, I think.
Absolutely, seriously. Particularly when I was in the army as well. If you guys have got an Englishman, Irishman, a Scotsman, and a Welshman all sitting around, you know, and particularly in football came up, a conversation stopper. So I just want to talk about the last particular one I want to chat with you about today, and this is sort of, you're bringing it kind of probably more up to date, really, with the Donbas work that you did in Ukraine. How did this particular project come about? Is it something that you'd seen in the news? It was on your radar, and you were kind of drawn to it because of what you were seeing on the.
Yeah, well, I'd seen all the stuff going on in the Maidan Square back in, January 2014, wasn't it? I was completely wrapped up with the big fishing story then, and so I couldn't do anything with that. But yeah, it had been on the radar, and I kept, you know, seeing news reports, and the more you look into it, it's just, the story just gets into you, and it won't leave you alone, basically. And it, you know, you just go down and see what you can do. I'd seen a story about basically the elderly on the front line, and I thought, well, that could be my gran, basically, who's adding along to this. But you know, suddenly they're all living quietly, happily, doing their thing, and suddenly, you know, they got shells landing in their backyards. I mean, at the top there, Valentina was 83. Like I say, she's the one who was picking out. In fact, there's a picture with all the bits and pieces that had landed in her garden. Yeah, that's her bedroom. Those are the bits that she pulled out of her garden, of the sniper's bullets that she pulled out of the walls. A shell had gone off outside her house, taken all the windows out. The same happened to Sergei, who lived across the road. But yeah, I mean, you know, they didn't ask for this. They didn't expect it. And it's how they deal with it. I mean, Valentina, I was asking her, well, had you thought of leaving? I said, well, my family obviously through a translator, my family wants me to leave, but I'm not leaving. I mean, I built up my house. My husband had died years earlier. I built my house for many, many years. Why should I leave it alone? And I found there are two types of people. A lot of elderly are there because either they can't go because they've got nowhere else to go, or they got no one else to go to, or they're too stubborn. They said, why should I go? You know, I mean, and you can hear, there's another shot on there called Albina was the first lady, Babushka, you know, which is a lovely name, I thought. She was, everybody broke down in tears. All the women cracked up basically when they were being interviewed. That's Maria. And I mean, it's that was there, right there where their car used to be. She was out at the time. Her husband and her nephew managed to get down to a little cellar just below here when they heard the shells coming on. It took the car out completely. They've only just started to rebuild the house, but they have no money. That's Albina. Yeah, I mean, she had lost about 3 stone in weight, and you could hear there was rumblings in the background. There was small arms fire and shells going off, and you could tell. I mean, every time she, you know, when she was just flinching, I think she wasn't conscious of what she was doing, but she was flinching every time. I
mean, the blog post I'll put out will have all of these links and stuff included, but you've got a multimedia section there on your website with a set of these images in a slideshow.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful music, I must admit. But at the beginning and the end, you kind of, you know, juxtaposition it with the shell fire, and it's just how loud and consistent it is as well where these people live. It's almost
that was
continuous.
Yeah, we stayed one night in Avdika, sorry, and I basically put the recorder and the mic on the veranda or the place. It was like a little block of flats. Beyond it was just a field, and then beyond that was the front line. So basically, the people living in that town are they're hearing that every night. I mean, every night. I mean, Pavel had been back and forth. My fix had been back and forth. And he said, yeah, this is, sometimes it's louder, sometimes it's quieter, but it's always there. So those sounds you can hear, sometimes it's louder earlier in the evening, sometimes it's louder, you know, just after midnight. That's Nikolai. He was in his front room with his wife when a shell hit the front of the house. That was their front room. They survived miraculously, covered in debris, but again, going back to the PTSD thing, I mean, a lot of people have suffered from high blood pressure because of the stress, and a lot of people have died because of that. Elderly people, can't afford the medicines. That's Vera, I think, is it Vera? That's her hairdressing salon. The salon's just behind there, and she lived in the back, and that was what was left of it, basically. She'd taken out a huge bank loan to update the premises just a couple of years earlier, and basically she still has to pay the debt back, but of course she's got no way of making a living now.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you were saying about people's families wanting them to move, but they won't move, particularly the elderly. It's because, well, that's where they live.
Yeah.
That's their home. And people forget that, you know, as in like, well, why don't you leave? You know what I mean? And when you go there, and I think that's what's so incredible, I think, about your photographs. For me, the way that they speak, but also give people, you know, you're not just there photographing these guys, either sort of, you know, the people, the oppressors, or the freedom fighters. That coming back to that East Timor thing. Here you're talking about real people and the impact on real people's lives. Of, like you said, she's standing there in her business and still got to pay the debt back. It's that's the connection, I think, that your work really does well.
It's the basic reality of it all, really. You know, some are better off than others, but I mean, the last person photographed on that trip was Svetlana. That's the lady with the dog. There's 2 shots of her, actually. Yes, the picture down here. We were in Pobasna. It was the last day, and I noticed the coverings on the roof, and I said to Bevan, you know, can we stop and have a little look and see what's what? And we didn't think anybody was living in the house. And the chap guy came up next door. He said, yeah, she's still living in there. And so we knocked on the door like 10 minutes before she came out, but she emerged. And we had an unspoken way of working, me and Pavel. We'd always speak to the people first, you know, and I would kind of ask questions and stuff and record. And then you said, can I take your pictures? All as the camera would come out later, you know. So anyway, I got the camera, we shot some pictures. Yeah, that's her just talking to, and Pavel would talk to them. Well, he's just a wonderful guy. He would just get these people to open up and they would just respond to him, you know. And that's the way we worked. I would do them, then we'd do a kind of formal portrait. And the thing that got me about Svetlana was when she stopped talking to them, I said, you know, can we do a portrait, you know? And it's the way she brushed herself down to make herself, and tidied herself up and adjusted her hat to make herself more presentable. And she says, oh, I look a mess up now, you look great, you know, you just, you know. And then we went on the back of the house, and she got Tutsig, her dog, her elderly dog, and she pulled him out. And she made that picture. I didn't really do anything, you know. She just stood there with Tutsig. The other dogs, who absolutely adored her, just kind of wandered around. But the story behind her was 4 grad rockets hit her house. One in the back, one in the front garden. 2 hit the roof. 15 minutes after a ceasefire on, I think it was February the 14th. And she was in bed. And she had nowhere else to go in the middle of winter, you know, hideously cold in that part of the world that time of year. And she's been there ever since. But she didn't have, at that time, she didn't have the papers for this. She owned the house, but she didn't have the papers. So she didn't qualify for help to rebuild it. But I'd since found out that actually through I think it was a Norwegian relief agency that I'd been in touch with, they knew about her, they'd offered her the materials, but she couldn't find anybody to do the work, which is another, you know, that's quite common, you know. Same with Nikolai's place, all the materials were outside the house, but there was no one there to do the work, basically. You know?
These are the things that are not interesting enough to make the mainstream news or media and stuff. So it's when you uncover those kind of stories, isn't it? And for me, they're the things, you know, as someone that runs the Dot Media Centre, for example, they're the things that I try to get people to connect with, is this getting away from the mainstream media's way of presenting fact, figures, sides, winners, losers, numbers of people killed, into, well, these are people like you and me.
Yeah.
And, you know, by the grace of God, for example, you know what I mean? Or location, geography, or being on the wrong side, or the wrong colour, or the wrong nationality. You could quite easily be in exactly the same situation. And I think for me, looking at your body of work, particularly those 4 that I've picked out because of the conflict reportage element, speak so eloquently of, you know, resilience, people's, you know, the humanity of it, but also the way that you work. And like I said, I would encourage other people to look at your website with your fishing work, and particularly the landfill project. I think it comes through that you're interested in people and you take the time to get to know them. And so whether you do that consciously or not, just, as an observer, I'm saying to you, I think that's why I was drawn to your work.
Well, like I say, people start talking, and sometimes I feel like some of the pictures are a little bit too formal, but I feel like because you hear the story first, you know, and when they tell you this, you feel like you've got to do something to do the story justice and present it the best way you possibly can. And, you know, and like I say, you wonder, because some of this, you know, some stuff gets published. These Timor stuff got published quite a bit over the years, so people got to hear about it. But, you know, it's a bit of a, when you've been exhibited, when you put them into exhibitions and this stuff gets exhibited, and people come out saying, I didn't know anything about that, you know, and I do. And you think, yeah, that's a result then, you know. And
that's great. You answered my final question, which is what's success for you? And I think, you know, probably the same for me. You know, when someone comes out of an event and turn around, you realise on their face or the questions they've asked, they've learned something, they're more aware, and they might go off and do something about it, even if it's something small, like, you know, donate a $5 or you know, follow someone on Twitter. I think that's the thing that's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. I had a show of the East Timorese pictures and the Bosnian pictures in a gallery called 10 Gallery in St. Ives many years ago now. I didn't know what to call it. I called it In Another Life, because that's exactly what it is. You know, people, they have one life and then they have another life. You know, they launched into this thing they didn't expect. I wasn't there at the time, but an East Timorese family actually came in to the gallery.
Wow.
You know, this would have been just after independence. And they said we had no idea anybody knew anything about it, you know. And they came back several times, you know, and I didn't get a chance to meet them, sadly, but and I thought, great, you know, at least, and many people, in fact, Cornelio had said, you know, it never happened, but he said, look, you know, when we get our independence, I'm going to invite all the journalists back, you know, for a big party, maybe one day.
Well, mate, fingers crossed. In these challenging times, that's at least something to worth hoping for, isn't it? Vince, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I know we're going to stay in touch because, like I said, I want that image and some of those images, and we'll formally put them into the section here at the Conflict Reportage Archive. And when the world returns to whatever the new normal is going to be, as someone said to me, after the Great Disruption, it will be great to have you up in Leicester for an exhibition of your work at the Dot Media Centre. I'll be honoured to do that.
That'd be great. I'd look forward to that. Thank you, John. And thanks to you. Yeah, and the great work you're doing there too. Brilliant.
Lovely. Have a good day, yeah?
And you, mate. Yeah, cheers then.